Ned Stark knelt in the courtyard of the Red Keep with the tang of blood still fresh in his memory. Even though King's Landing was eerily quiet under the new order, the cries of victory after Robert Baratheon had claimed the Iron Throne still echoed in the corridors. But in the corners, in the shadows, an unease clung to the walls like mildew. He had only just arrived in the capital, having paused along the way to ensure Lyanna's final rest at the Tower of Joy, carrying the burden of promises that weighed heavier than any suit of plate. It was here, in these corridors, that everything would change again, this time with an unexpected discovery that would test his loyalty and honor in ways he never could have foreseen. He had come to the city with reluctance, more out of duty to his friend Robert than out of any particular fondness for the capital. He abhorred the smell of rot beneath the perfumed airs of the court, and on his first day back in the Red Keep, he found the entire structure reeked of betrayal and old ghosts. The war was won, or so they all told themselves, and Robert was named King of the Seven Kingdoms. Yet Ned knew that war never truly ended after the battles. The lords quibbled over spoils, the small folk turned from celebration to fear at the slightest rumor, and enemies never rested in a place as fickle as King's Landing. That evening, the flickering torchlight in Maegor's holdfast revealed more of the keep's secrets than Ned cared to see. He wandered the halls alone, seeking a moment of quiet reflection, something to steady his spirit. The rebellion had cost so many lives, and it had ended with such brutality. Tywin Lannister's sack of the city, the murder of the Targaryen children, the memory of their small, broken bodies weighed on him. Ned had a sense of dread that these dark deeds would taint Robert's reign from the start. Robert might not have ordered it, but he had embraced Tywin's sudden display of fealty far too easily for Ned's liking. He stood near a high window, gazing at the black sky and the distant sparkle of stars. In the courtyard, a few Lannister guards still patrolled. They wore the lion crest proudly, as though the royal stag above them was merely an afterthought. To Ned, it felt as if Tywin Lannister had latched onto Robert's victory with sharpened claws, claiming a share in the spoils while forging beneficial alliances. Robert had betrothed himself to Cersei Lannister, solidifying the Baratheon Lannister bond, a political necessity, or so the new king insisted. Ned was uncertain. A match with a Lannister was rarely a matter of chance, more a calculated move for power. Already, Robert's wedding to Cersei had been carried out at a furious pace. Everyone was so eager for the new realm to see its joyous union, to bind the rebellious past behind them. It smelled of hush and hurry, as if certain truths had to be hidden before the realm could raise a brow. Cersei was beautiful, undeniably so, and Robert, well, he was the triumphant rebel whose laughter filled every hall. On the surface, it was all feasts and cheers. But Ned, who had known Robert for years, suspected that the king's heart might yet ache for Lyanna. Still, Robert had chosen this path, and Ned had no desire to spoil his friend's happiness, if happiness it could bring him. Yet as the nights passed, Ned found new reasons for unease. Whispers of odd comings and goings near the Queen's chambers. The uncertain looks among the Lannisters themselves, half triumphant, half watchful. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, he was everywhere, lingering close to his sister. Ned had never trusted Jaime's intentions, though he recognized the man's skill with a sword. It was that manner of his, the casual arrogance, the golden hair that the court seemed to admire far too quickly, that reminded Ned of how easily knights could break their vows. Jaime had taken an oath to protect the king, yet he had stabbed Aerys in the back, or so the stories went. And now that same man wore the Kingsguard's white cloak as if it were a flamboyant cape. On one such night, Ned could not rest. Sleep eluded him, haunted by dreams of Lyanna's dying gasp in the Tower of Joy. He decided to walk the keep, to tire himself enough that he might sleep. The Red Keep's corridors were labyrinthine and silent, the hush magnifying every footstep. At times, the only sound was his own breath, or the dull hum of some distant torch. Eventually, he found himself near Cersei's chambers, not by design but by chance. He was about to turn around when he heard voices, one low, another urgent. At first he thought he recognized Jaime Lannister's voice, smooth but edged with tension. The second, quieter voice must have been Cersei's. Ned hesitated, telling himself it was not his place to eavesdrop on the private words of the queen and her brother. But something in Jaime's tone set his teeth on edge. Curiosity battled with honor until the curiosity won out. He stepped near the thick wooden door, pressing against the wall so no one would see him. He could not make out every word, but the fragments that filtered through struck him like ice-cold shards. Whispers of "no one must know," and "Robert is oblivious," and "we are always so careful." Ned's stomach tightened. He pressed closer, the sense of wrongdoing bearing down on him. He recognized Cersei's voice, surprisingly harsh. "He suspects nothing," she said in a tight whisper. "But the risk grows with every day you linger here." Jaime's response, too quiet to fully catch, contained words like danger, child, and only the two of us. Ned's heart began to pound. Had he misheard? He prayed he had. But the more he strained to listen, the clearer it became. The talk was not merely about some casual dalliance. There was mention of Robert, of the risk to them both, and the idea of a child, an unborn child. Ned stepped back, every inch of him crawling with disbelief. The underlying intimacy was unmistakable. Jaime, the queen's brother, was also her lover, and it was more than a passing indiscretion. She might already be pregnant. A nauseating wave of shock struck him. He stepped away too quickly, nearly stumbling over his own boots. The corridor seemed to tilt. This was monstrous, a sin in the eyes of both gods and men. Incest within the royal family. And if the child were Jaime's, it would mean Robert's rightful claim to an heir would be overshadowed by a child of Lannister blood. The realm's entire future could be thrown into jeopardy if this was not confronted. Ned's mind reeled. Part of him wanted to storm in, to throw the door open and drag Jaime away. But that would accomplish nothing except cause immediate violence. Jaime was armed, no doubt, and one outburst could end in a royal scandal that might break the kingdom at its fragile new start. No, Ned needed to handle this carefully. Confronting them in the dead of night would only provoke madness. He slipped away, forcing his limbs to remain steady. He was no spy, no mastermind. He was a man of honor, a straightforward soldier who believed in doing what was right. But some truths, he knew, were dangerous in the extreme. And if Tywin Lannister got wind that Ned knew, the repercussions could be horrific. Tywin was not a man to hesitate in protecting his family's name. Ned spent the rest of that night pacing in his own chambers, his thoughts swirling as he tried to decide on a course of action. Morning came all too soon, and with it his duty. He dressed in the plainest garments he could, not wanting to draw attention. The truth was roiling inside him like a storm, but he could not simply blurt it out. He had to tell Robert eventually, but how? Robert was the king now, flush with triumph, newly wed to the woman in question. If Ned told him that his best friend's new wife was carrying her brother's child, would Robert even believe him? Or would he rage, drunkenly, lash out at everything in his path, possibly setting off another war? The realm was too fragile. The last time a rumor flared in King's Landing, children died. Ned could not risk a second wave of violence. He decided that he must confirm his suspicions beyond doubt, and he must do so quickly, before Cersei's condition became more obvious to others. If Cersei truly was pregnant with Jaime's child, the line of succession itself was corrupted. Robert's claim to fatherhood would be a lie, a wretched fraud that might tear the kingdom apart. Ned swore to the old gods that he would protect the realm from such deception. But the cost, he feared, might be unimaginable. That very morning, Ned sought out the one man whose knowledge of secrets might surpass even Varys the Spider, Littlefinger. Peter Baelish was cunning, a man whose loyalties shifted like leaves in the wind, but he had eyes and ears in every corner of the city. Ned had little love for him, but he recognized the necessity of gleaning knowledge from one who trafficked in secrets. Meeting in a quiet alcove not far from the gardens, Ned asked pointed questions about the Lannisters, about odd behavior. Peter, with his sly grin, let slip that Jaime's presence at the Queen's side was an old rumor. But the cautious look in his eyes told Ned that Peter suspected more than rumor. He merely shrugged and said, "Incest is a foul crime. Accusing the Queen might be foolish, my lord." "I trust you have evidence." The question was a trap, Ned knew. If he confessed his knowledge to Peter, it would doubtless travel through the city like wildfire. So Ned simply thanked him, said he was hearing some gossip from the guard, and left it at that. For now, it was enough to confirm that people whispered about the closeness of the twins. The seeds of rumor were already present. Ned walked away from Littlefinger with the hair on his neck standing on end. The city reeked of secrets, and he was no spymaster. He wanted to handle this quietly, but the more eyes that landed on him, the more danger he courted. He needed to confirm the truth one way or another before confronting Robert. That was paramount. One piece of evidence might come from a maester's records. A queen's pregnancy was always attended to by Maester Pycelle, who must keep some note of her health. Another might come from the king's side. If Robert had truly lain with her enough for a child, perhaps the truth would be simpler. But Ned doubted Robert's attention to anything beyond feasting and drinking after the war. The king was often in his cups, and while Robert had boasted about bedding his wife, the reality of their new marriage might be less consummated than the king's bravado let on. That afternoon, Ned made an excuse to visit Grand Maester Pycelle, claiming he needed advice on a mild sickness that had beset his men on the road. Pycelle was all too eager to show off his knowledge and recommended potions for traveling soldiers. Ned steered the conversation around carefully, taking note of Pycelle's responses. When he ventured to mention the queen's health, Pycelle chuckled in his deep, pompous manner. "Oh, the queen is quite well," he said. "A bit of faintness in the mornings, but that is not so unusual for a young bride, especially one who may yet bless the king with an heir." Ned pressed carefully. "You believe she is with child, then?" Pycelle tugged at his beard. "I cannot say for certain. The signs are favorable, but we must wait a bit longer before giving a joyous announcement." Ned offered a polite nod, though inside, his heart sank. It was precisely as he feared. It was too soon for an official pronouncement, but Pycelle suspected she might already be pregnant. Ned quickly changed the subject to something else. He did not want to rouse Pycelle's suspicions by lingering too long on the matter. Though Pycelle was old, he had served many kings and had a cunning glint behind those milky eyes. When Ned left, his face was grim. There it was, the seed of proof he needed. The queen might well be carrying a child, and from her conversation with Jaime, it seemed clear that Robert was not the father. In the days that followed, Ned found himself in a state of near-constant anxiety. He wrote a few short letters to Winterfell, letting Catelyn know that he might be delayed, but giving no details. How to put into words something that might start a war if read by the wrong eyes. Finally, he could delay no longer. He needed to speak to Robert. That conversation would be the hardest he had ever attempted. Ned remembered how Robert had loved Lyanna, how that love had led to the rebellion. If he discovered that his new wife had betrayed him in such a vile way, gods only knew how he would react. And if Robert refused to believe him, Ned would be placed in immediate peril. But the truth was the truth. Ned's honor would not allow him to remain silent. He chose a time after a small council meeting, cornering Robert in the king's solar. The king was removing his crown, rubbing his temples. Robert's once muscular frame had thickened a bit from revelry, and his eyes were already red from a morning's worth of wine. Ned felt a pang of sorrow, remembering the friend who had galloped with him across the war-torn fields, unstoppable in his passion. Yet he also remembered Rhaegar Targaryen's rubies scattered across the trident, the way Robert's warhammer had shattered the prince's chest. Robert had once been unstoppable indeed. Now he was a king, but a man who might allow complacency to dull his edge. Robert looked up at Ned and grinned. "By the gods, Ned, you look like your face is carved from rock. Sit, have a cup of wine with me. It's good arbor gold." Ned closed the door behind him and shook his head. "Your Grace, I come with urgent words, not a thirst for wine." Robert's grin faltered. He sensed the seriousness in Ned's tone. "Urgent words? You've never been one for riddles, so speak them plainly." Ned stepped closer, his voice pitched low. "I beg you to hear me through, Robert, and to trust that I speak out of love for you and for the realm." At that, Robert's brow furrowed. He set the cup aside. "What is this about?" Ned took a deep breath. "It concerns your queen and her brother Jaime." Immediately, Robert's expression darkened. "What about them?" Ned willed his heart to remain steady, for he feared the king's temper. "I have reason to believe and evidence to suggest that Cersei and Jaime are more than siblings, that they are lovers." He spat the word out like poison. "That any child she bears is not yours, but Jaime's." For a heartbeat, the Solar was silent. Ned watched the color rise in Robert's face, turning it an alarming shade of crimson. "You dare," Robert began in a trembling voice, "you dare come to me with this vile claim?" "Robert," Ned said, "I would not speak so if I was not certain. I overheard them. They spoke openly of their affair, and Grand Maester Pycelle believes the queen to be pregnant." Robert shot to his feet. His fists were clenched, and for an instant, Ned thought he might strike him. The king's eyes bulged with fury. "You overheard? This is madness." He began to pace, his voice rising. "Cersei, my wife, committing incest with her own brother? That is an abomination. How dare you accuse the queen? This is treasonous talk, Ned." Ned braced himself. "Treasonous or not, it is the truth. I would gladly keep silent if the child was truly yours, but I cannot watch you be deceived. This is a deception that threatens the entire realm. The line of succession." Robert rounded on him, fists trembling. "Shut your mouth about the line of succession." His voice was thick with anguish as well as fury. I've drunk with them, I've hunted with Jaime. Gods, they saved my life in the battle for King's Landing, or so I believed. If this is a lie, by the gods, Ned, if you lie." "I do not lie," Ned said firmly. "I have never lied to you." Robert ground his teeth, and a quiet sort of despair flickered across his face, as if part of him believed Ned but desperately wished not to. "I'll not see my new reign destroyed by rumors. You understand that, Ned? If this is true, it means war. Tywin Lannister will not let such an accusation stand." "Nor should he," Ned said gravely, "if it is untrue, but I fear it is. And in time, more people will see that child and notice it does not look like you. They will whisper, if this is not confronted now." "No!" Robert roared, slamming his fist on a table. "I will not confront this yet. Gods be damned. I've just won a throne, lost so many good men. I will not tear the realm apart again for a rumor, no matter how credible." He pointed a shaking finger at Ned. "You keep this quiet. Do you hear me? Swear it to me." Ned froze. "I cannot pretend ignorance, Robert. My loyalty is to you but also to the realm. If the child is not yours—" "Shut up." Robert nearly lunged at him, eyes full of rage and a hint of tears. "Don't you see what you do to me? Lyanna is dead. Ned, dead. I have no heir, no future, except what Cersei can give me. By the gods, you want me to believe it's all a sham? Let me at least find some scraps of peace in this marriage before you rip my heart out." Ned bowed his head. He felt pity for his friend, who still mourned Lyanna in his heart. "I am sorry, Robert." Robert stepped back, breathing heavily. "If you truly are my friend, then you will keep this to yourself for now. I will watch them. By the gods, I'll watch them closely. If I see proof with my own eyes, then I will act. But not on your word alone, Ned. Not on an overheard conversation. I can't." He swallowed, his face twisting with anguish. "I can't face that yet." Ned let out a long breath. "As you command, your grace." "Go," Robert said, waving him away, his voice ragged. "Go, and not another word of this." Ned bowed and left the Solar with a heavy heart, uncertain how he felt about Robert's response. He had done his duty, had revealed the truth, but Robert wanted to bury it, hide from it. The king demanded silence, leaving Ned to wrestle with the knowledge alone. Robert would watch them, yes, but would he truly see? Or would he drown the suspicion in wine and feasts until it was too late? And what of the child that might soon grow in Cersei's womb, claimed as Robert's heir? The next week was a test of Ned's composure. He continued to perform his duties, meeting with other lords, setting up the transition to Robert's new government, always conscious of the dagger of knowledge hidden inside him. He noticed that Jaime Lannister was as brazen as ever, often standing guard near Cersei or passing her in the halls with a private smirk. Ned's stomach churned at each of those small gestures that hinted at a secret bond. Yet he had promised Robert to remain silent, so he held his tongue. Only once did he catch Cersei's eyes in the corridor, and for a moment her gaze hardened, as though she suspected that Ned knew something. Then she swept past in a swirl of Lannister crimson and gold, regal and untouchable. As the days turned into weeks, the tension coiled tighter. A raven arrived from Winterfell summoning Ned back, for problems had arisen in the north. There were reports of ironborn reavers harassing the stony shore, and Ned's presence was requested by his bannermen. He wrestled with the question of leaving King's Landing at such a crucial time, but Robert himself urged him to go. "You have duties to your own land," the king said, his voice clipped. "Take care of them. I will handle things here." Ned was far from convinced that Robert was handling anything, but he knew that the North needed him, so he prepared to depart. On the day he meant to leave, Ned decided on one final precaution. He would speak to Cersei herself, perhaps gauge her reaction. He found her in the gardens of the Red Keep, standing beneath a twisted elm, her golden hair catching the sunlight. The day was bright but cold, an odd combination. She wore a green gown that showed off her slender waist, a waist that might soon thicken if Pycelle's suspicion was correct. Jaime was not in sight. Good. When Ned approached, she gave him a measured look. "Lord Stark," she said, her voice coolly polite. "What brings you to me?" He bowed slightly, a courtesy. "Your Grace, I wish to offer my farewells. I am returning to the north to see to urgent matters." She tilted her head. "So I've heard. I trust your journey will be safe." For a moment, Ned searched her face, seeing if he could read any sign of guilt or fear. Instead, Cersei's expression was composed, her eyes watchful. He cleared his throat. "I would caution you, Your Grace, to tread carefully in the days to come. King's Landing is a place of many rumors, and secrets do not remain secrets for long." Her eyes narrowed. A flicker of something, danger perhaps, crossed her features. "Do you have something to say, Lord Stark? If so, speak plainly." Ned paused. He had promised Robert he would not cast open accusations. Still, he could not resist a subtle warning. "Only that I have seen how quickly trust can be broken in this city, and should any wrongdoing come to light, there will be heavy consequences." Cersei smiled thinly, like a cat toying with a mouse. "You speak of wrongdoing, yet you do not name it. Is this a threat?" "Not a threat, my queen," Ned said steadily, "but a plea for caution, for the king's sake. He has endured many burdens." She let out a short laugh, dismissive. "Yes, the burdens of a king." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Lord Stark, I know you are an honorable man, and I suspect you see yourself as Robert's faithful friend. But you must also recognize that Robert is not the man he once was. Nor is he the king he pretends to be. He has his habits, his distractions. If you think you can protect him from shadows, you are mistaken." Ned stiffened. "I do not claim to protect him from everything, but I will not stand idle if—" She cut him off with a sharp look. "If you had any notion of challenging me, you should be aware that you will not win. The Lannisters always pay their debts, and we do not suffer threats lightly." Her green eyes flashed with a steely confidence. "Now, if that is all, I will bid you farewell." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Ned feeling a shiver of dread. Cersei was no fool. She likely had guessed that Ned suspected something, or perhaps she knew that he had overheard. In her veiled words, Ned heard a promise of retribution should he speak openly. Tywin Lannister might rally his banners at the slightest affront to his family's honor, and the realm might plunge into war once more. That night, Ned set out for Winterfell with a heavy heart, accompanied by his small retinue. The king bade him farewell with forced joviality, slapping him on the back and urging him to return soon. But Ned saw in Robert's eyes an ongoing torment, the knowledge that something was amiss in his marriage. Ned prayed to the old gods that Robert would find the courage to act. As the miles fell behind him, Ned reflected on the precarious state of the realm. The Targaryens might be gone, except for the rumored exiles across the narrow sea, but the Lannisters were a threat of a different kind, one that would strike from within. Ned was uncertain if the knowledge he carried would remain forever in the shadows. Sooner or later, truth had a way of emerging. He could only hope it did not emerge too late. Returning to Winterfell gave Ned a measure of solace. The cold northern air, the sight of the ancient walls, and the sound of the Godswood's quiet breezes all brought him peace. Catelyn greeted him warmly, but soon she sensed something weighed upon him. After the children were settled, Robb, Sansa, Arya, and little Bran, she pulled him aside. "Tell me what's wrong," she insisted gently. "I can see it on your face. You came back from King's Landing more troubled than when you left for war." Ned ran a hand through his hair, feeling the burden all over again. He could hardly bear to speak the words, but Catelyn was his wife, the keeper of his household. If there was anyone he could trust, it was her. So in the privacy of their chambers, he told her in hushed tones what he had discovered, that the Queen and Jaime Lannister were lovers, that the child she carried might not be Robert's. Catelyn's eyes grew wide with horror. "By the Seven," she breathed, pressing a hand to her mouth. "But that is treason of the highest order. Why does Robert not act?" Ned exhaled slowly. "Because he fears the realm will tear itself apart if he challenges Tywin Lannister right now. He is also not ready to accept the betrayal of his wife. Perhaps he still hopes I'm mistaken." Catelyn's concern etched lines into her face. "What do we do? If word spreads, war could ignite. The Lannisters hold so much power. They've already seized the opportunity to secure the throne through this marriage. If the child is not Robert's, Tywin and Cersei might use every means to conceal the truth." Ned nodded gravely. Robert insisted I remain silent. I cannot simply speak out. But I will not stand by if the child is declared heir to the realm when it's born." Catelyn clasped his hands. "We must be careful, Ned. For all our sakes. The Lannisters are dangerous." Days turned into weeks in Winterfell. Ned resumed his duties as Warden of the North, dealing with the Ironborn raiders and settling local disputes. But the memory of that night in King's Landing never left him. He awaited a raven that might bring word that Robert had done something, anything, about the Queen's betrayal. None came. Instead, he received the usual updates on the King's progress. Feasts, hunts, the appointment of new members to the small council. Nothing about any scandal, no rumors of arrests. It was as if Ned's discovery had sunk beneath the black water of the capital, unseen. Catelyn grew nervous. "Do you think Robert is ignoring it altogether?" she asked one night as they sat in their solar, a candle flickering between them. Ned stared at the flame. Perhaps, or perhaps he is biding his time, hoping to catch them in the act. But in his heart, Ned suspected that Robert might be drowning his suspicions in drink. The war had drained him, and the taste of victory might have soured quickly if he acknowledged the truth of his wife's infidelity. As the months wore on, a raven finally arrived announcing that Queen Cersei was indeed with child, a cause for great celebration throughout the realm. A tourney would be held to honor the impending heir, and Robert invited the great lords to attend in King's Landing. Ned felt a chill at the news. This was the very child he believed to be Jaime's. If Robert publicly recognized that child as his, it would set a dangerous precedent. But to refuse the king's invitation would be a great insult, so Ned and Catelyn prepared for the journey south. They would not bring all the children, only Sansa and Arya to mingle at court. Robb, Bran, and Rickon were too young or too vital to remain in the north, but they left them in the care of Maester Luwin and Ser Roderick Castle. Ned's party reached King's Landing amidst the bustle of preparations for the grand tourney. The city was more crowded than ever, with knights arriving from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Colorful pavilions lined the field outside the walls, and the noise was relentless. Trumpets, cheers, hawkers selling trinkets. Ned found it all overwhelming. but he remained focused on the dire reason for his return. They were greeted cordially enough. Jaime Lannister was among the Kingsguard that welcomed them at the gate. He inclined his head in a mocking bow. "Lord Stark, pleasure to see you again. I hope the roads were kind." Ned answered curtly, "They were fine." He studied Jaime's face, searching for signs of fear or guilt, but found only a confident smirk. Nearby, Cersei stood in regal attire, her belly beginning to swell noticeably beneath her elegant gown. She offered Ned and Catelyn a gracious smile, though it did not reach her eyes. King Robert appeared soon after, pulling Ned aside with a hearty laugh that seemed forced. "Come, walk with me," he said, draping a large arm around Ned's shoulders. "We have much to catch up on." They strolled a short distance, bodyguards trailing behind at a discreet distance. Robert glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. "I know why you've come," he muttered under his breath. "But I tell you now, let it lie. The child is mine. I have bedded her enough times to be sure of it." Ned frowned. "Are you certain?" Robert's gaze flicked away. "I'm the king, Ned. I say it's mine, and so it is." The bitterness in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Not another word of this. I'm warning you." Swallowing his protest, Ned said, "Very well," but he could see the torment in Robert's eyes. The king had chosen to embrace a lie, or at least to outwardly claim fatherhood, whether it was true or not. If Robert forced himself to bed Cersei in the last months, he might cling to hope that the child was indeed his. But Ned suspected otherwise. The days before the tourney were filled with feasting and jousting practice. The tension in the Red Keep was thick enough to taste. Cersei entertained lords and ladies, smiling through the endless talk of the unborn heir. Jaime moved about like a golden shadow, rarely far from her side. Ned found himself watching them, searching for any small slip of the mask. He noticed the gentle touches, the shared glances. He was certain any watchful eyes would see them, but perhaps no one dared to interpret the truth. Or maybe the city was willfully blind, happy to ignore the swirling rumors if it meant stability under the new monarchy. One afternoon, while the lords and ladies admired the training knights in the yard, Ned caught sight of Robert perched on a balcony above, guzzling wine and roaring with laughter at the sparring men. Yet the laughter had a hard edge, and his eyes never drifted toward his wife or her brother. A flicker of pity ran through Ned's mind. The next day brought the opening matches of the grand tourney. The field was a riot of color, banners, surcoats, the painted shields of the knights. Trumpets sounded, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Ned watched from the stands beside Catelyn, both of them flanking Robert. Cersei sat on Robert's other side, her green gown embroidered with gold lions, a heavy cloak trimmed with fur draped over her shoulders despite the warm day. The unborn child was the reason for that cloak, or so the queen claimed. Jaime was seated not far away, wearing the white cloak of the Kingsguard, though the glint in his eye suggested an eagerness to join the fray. As the knights rode at one another, the cheers swelled. Sansa sat enthralled, her eyes sparkling at the spectacle. Arya, on the other hand, fidgeted, more interested in the swordwork than the pageantry. Ned tried to focus on the matches, but his gaze often strayed to the king. Robert bellowed encouragement at the participants, calling out favorites, and gulped down wine as if it were water. The tension around his eyes never fully subsided. Late in the day, after a string of justs, Ser Barristan Selmy, the venerable Kingsguard knight, approached Robert and suggested the king might want to retire. The sun was setting, and the king had drunk more than enough. Robert reluctantly agreed, but demanded a few more cups of wine in his solar. Ned escorted him, while Cersei retreated to her chambers, claiming fatigue. Once inside, Robert dismissed all attendants except Ned, leaning heavily against a table. "Damn me, but the wine is strong today," Robert muttered. Then he looked at Ned with bleary eyes. "You know, sometimes I think about the old days. The battles, the hunting, the women we chased. I can't do that now, can I? She's my queen. And this child, I must claim it as mine, mustn't I?" Ned rested a hand on Robert's shoulder. You are the king. What you say becomes truth in the minds of many. But in your heart, do you believe? Robert slammed a fist on the table. In my heart, I believe nothing. I cannot allow myself to believe. For if it's true, if the child is Jaime's, I would have to kill them both or at least brand them as traitors. And that would start a war with the Lannisters. Gods help me. I'm too tired for another war. He sagged, shoulders slumped. I wanted a son, Ned, an heir of my own blood. I lost Lyanna, and with her I lost my dreams. Now all I have is this cursed throne and a golden bride who might be as false as any whore. Ned said nothing, for words of comfort felt impossible. He offered Robert a seat, and the king sank into it, covering his face with his hands. Silence stretched. Then Robert's hands slid away to reveal a tormented expression. Your father always said you Starks had your honor to guide you. Tell me, Ned, how do I keep my honor now? If I accuse her, I bring chaos. If I ignore it, I live a lie. Ned's voice was soft. Sometimes there is no clean solution, Robert. You do what you must, for the good of the realm. The price of the crown is often steep. Robert laughed hollowly. Aye, steep indeed. That night, the second round of festivities commenced, including a lavish feast in the great hall. Minstrels sang, jugglers performed, and the king, still flushed with drink, laughed too loudly. Cersei was radiant in gold and emeralds, drawing many compliments. Jaime hovered close, smiling politely but saying little. Ned sat with Catelyn, each course of food tasting like ash. The air vibrated with hidden tension. At one point, Renly Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, approached Ned with a smile. Lord Stark, I've not had the chance to congratulate you on your victory in the war. You served our realm well. Ned inclined his head. Thank you, Lord Renly. Renly glanced around, then lowered his voice. I sense a storm brewing in King's Landing, though I cannot yet see its form. The king is not himself lately, and the queen is... Well, the queen is as she always is. Have you any idea what troubles him? Ned measured his words carefully. The burdens of rule are great, and Robert carries many regrets. Renly pursed his lips. Yes, well, I'd hate to see him undone by regrets. Our family has only just come to power. We should be celebrating a bright future, not drowning in gloom. Ned forced a small smile. Perhaps a new heir will bring him joy. Perhaps. Renly moved on, though he cast a lingering, thoughtful glance at Ned. As the feast progressed, Ned grew uneasy with how much Robert drank. The king roared with laughter at a bawdy jester's routine, then began calling for more wine, more ale. Cersei smiled prettily, but she gave Robert a sharp look now and again. Eventually, Robert lurched to his feet, gesturing for silence. The hall quieted, and Robert raised his cup. To my queen, he declared, voice slurring slightly. May she bear me strong sons, one after another, until we fill the Red Keep with the sound of Baratheon princelings. The crowd cheered, though the words stabbed Ned's heart. A glance at Cersei showed her wearing a modest smile, but he sensed a hardness behind it. Robert staggered to Cersei, planting a loud kiss on her mouth in front of everyone. Applause burst forth. For a moment, the king turned, glancing at Jaime with a mocking grin as if to say, See, she is mine. Jaime's face was impassive, but his eyes burned with something Ned could not name. Anger, jealousy, or hate. Possibly all three. Later that night, when the crowd dispersed and torches dimmed, Ned escorted Catelyn back to their guest chambers. She gripped his arm. Ned, this cannot continue. This tension will break eventually. We should return home soon. The north is safer than this nest of vipers. Ned nodded. I would like nothing more. But as Hand of the King, you are not yet named Hand, though Robert has hinted at it, Catelyn reminded him. If he does name you, you'll be forced to remain in this pit. Do you truly want that? Ned sighed. No, but if I am named Hand, I will not refuse Robert. He needs me, or so he believes. Perhaps I can do some good here, keep things from unraveling. Catelyn's eyes were sad. I just fear for you, and for us all." The next day brought the final rounds of jousting, culminating in a fierce competition among some of the realm's finest knights. Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, thundered through the lists, unhorsing men with brutal efficiency. Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, dazzled the crowd with his skill and handsome face. The day was stiflingly hot under the bright sun, and the stands were packed. A thick tension hovered in the humid air. When Jaime took the field, the crowd erupted in cheers for the Kingslayer, though some in the throng booed, remembering the oath he had broken to kill the Mad King. Jaime rode magnificently, his golden hair shining in the sun. He wore resplendent armor chased with gold, the roaring lion of House Lannister emblazoned on his shield, though he also wore the white cloak of the Kingsguard. With casual arrogance, he saluted the royal box. Ned felt a surge of disgust, recalling that not only had Jaime murdered Aerys, he had then proceeded to bed his own sister, and now boasted about as if he were a true knight. Jaime's opponent was a large, competent knight from the Vale, Ser Brynden Buckwell, but Jaime jousted with lethal grace, splintering Buckwell's shield and sending him crashing off his horse. The victor raised his visor, flashing a bright grin as the crowd roared. Ned forced himself to keep a neutral face. Beside him, Robert clapped half-heartedly. Cersei, however, displayed a triumphant smile, and Ned thought he saw a secret glimmer exchanged between her and Jaime. A quick flick of the eyes, gone in an instant. The tournament ended with Ser Loras bested by the Mountain, though the match ended in chaos when Gregor nearly killed Loras in a rage. It was the Hound who intervened, the two massive brothers clashing in a savage display that made the onlookers gape in horror. Robert had to bellow at them to stop, nearly flinging himself over the railing. In the end, the Hound saved Loras, Gregor stormed off in a fury, and the stands buzzed with speculation. Amid all the excitement, Ned noticed Jaime's expression. Bored, faintly amused, as if such violence was nothing to him. Cersei, however, seemed shaken. She clutched her belly protectively, perhaps rattled by the display of near murder. That night, Ned received a summons from Robert. He found the king in his solar again, though this time Robert was not alone. Standing by the window, arms folded, was Jaime Lannister. Ned halted, tension coiling inside him. The Kingslayer's green eyes flicked over Ned, betraying mild curiosity and some hidden scorn. Robert, who had clearly been drinking again, grumbled, "Close the door, Ned." Ned did as told. He looked between the two men. Robert cleared his throat, leaning heavily against the table. "I've decided to name you Hand of the King, Ned. The realm needs your steady hand, your honor." Ned felt a jolt. He had anticipated this but hoped it would not come so soon. "Your Grace, I'm honored, but..." Robert raised a hand, silencing him. "No buts. You'll do it. However, there's something else. Jaime here was just telling me that he will be my hand if you refuse. I've half a mind to accept that, given that the Lannisters have proven more than generous to the crown." Jaime smirked slightly. "I live to serve, your Grace." Ned's jaw tightened. Robert glanced at him. "What say you, Ned? Will you accept, or shall I name Jaime?" Ned did not miss the precariousness of the situation. Putting Jaime Lannister in the second most powerful position in the realm would be disastrous. The king had to be provoking him intentionally. "I will accept," Ned said slowly. "If that is truly your wish." Robert gave him a hard look. "It is." He downed another gulp of wine. "As my hand, Ned, you will respect my decisions. That includes how I handle my queen, my marriage, and my heir." He set the cup down with a thud. "Jaime and I have come to an understanding. The Lannisters will back me fully, with gold and men, so long as we maintain our alliance." Ned's eyes shifted to Jaime, whose expression was smug. "I see," Jaime said lightly. "The realm needs peace, Lord Stark. We wouldn't want any ugly rumors to rock this delicate boat, would we?" A muscle in Ned's jaw twitched. He understood this was Jaime's subtle threat. If Ned pressed the issue of Cersei's fidelity, the Lannisters would not hesitate to challenge him. and Robert was telling Ned that he must keep silent or step aside. Perhaps it was all orchestrated by Cersei and Jaime to ensure the king's complicity, while tangling Ned in political knots. Robert wiped his mouth. "You two have never liked each other, I know, but in my name you will work together. I've no stomach for more infighting." Ned dipped his head, though anger burned inside him. "Of course, Your Grace." Jaime nodded. "I will do my duty as Kingsguard, and Lord Stark will serve as hand. The king's justice will be upheld. All is well." The faintest sarcasm underlined his words. Robert exhaled heavily, rubbing his temple. "Good. Then it's done." He waved a hand in dismissal. "Go, both of you. The hour is late, and I want no further squabbling." Jaime gave a shallow bow. Ned followed suit, though he felt sick at heart. As they stepped into the corridor, Jaime halted Ned with a hand on his arm. Ned stiffened, eyes flashing at the contact, but Jaime only gave him a brilliant, mocking smile. "Congratulations, Hand. Let us hope you find King's Landing hospitable." Ned looked at him coldly. "I serve the king and the realm, Sir Jaime. That is all." Jaime's grin did not waver. "Indeed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'm off to guard the queen's door." With that, he turned and strode away, his white cloak swirling behind him. Ned stood there for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. The idea of Jaime standing guard outside Cersei's door night after night filled him with revulsion. But now, as Hand, Ned would be entangled in these politics more deeply than ever. He knew he must keep up appearances, maintain the king's peace, and hold on to his honor by whatever means he could. The question was how to keep his family safe and how to prevent a child of incest from eventually ascending the Iron Throne. If Robert insisted that the child was his, all official records would say so. If Robert died unexpectedly, that child would be crowned as the rightful Baratheon heir. But in truth, the realm would be ruled by a Lannister-born product of treachery. Even so, Ned sensed that pressing this truth now would cause a war. Perhaps, he thought, there might be another path. If he gathered enough proof, irrefutable proof, he might force Robert's hand, or at least force Cersei and Jaime into a corner. But that risked Tywin Lannister's wrath, and if Tywin marched on King's Landing, the realm might descend into chaos. The best course might be to bide his time, gather allies quietly, and watch for an opportunity when Robert was sober enough and strong enough to act. In the meantime, Ned resolved to ensure that no harm came to the king or the realm from the Lannisters' machinations. A few days later, Ned was officially named Hand of the King in a brief but grand ceremony in the throne room. Robert sat on the Iron Throne, looking weary and a bit hungover. Cersei stood beside him, regal and inscrutable. Jaime was stationed amongst the other Kingsguard, clad in shining white armor. Lords and ladies gathered to witness the oath-taking, among them Peter Baelish, Varys, Renly Baratheon, and Pycelle. As Ned knelt before the throne, reciting the ancient vows of the Hand, he could not shake the feeling that he was being dragged deeper into a pit of vipers. The applause that followed echoed hollowly in his ears. Once named Hand, Ned moved his family into more permanent quarters within the Red Keep. He had access to the Tower of the Hand, though it felt more like a gilded cage. Servants came and went, and whispers ran through the corridors. Sansa was thrilled to be in the capital, dreaming of tourneys and knights. Arya found the intrigue stifling. Meanwhile, Catelyn felt uneasy, ever watchful of Lannister eyes upon them. Ned soon found that the position of Hand was as demanding as it was fraught with political pitfalls. He presided over small council meetings with Robert usually absent. He oversaw the city's finances, which were in disarray thanks to the lavish spending on feasts and tournaments. He listened to the daily complaints of petitioners, and always, he kept one eye on the dealings of the Lannisters. He observed that Littlefinger was quite close with the Queen, though in what capacity, Ned could not be sure. Varys, with his soft voice and watchful eyes, fed Ned bits of information regarding unrest in the city, rumors of banditry in the Riverlands, and the murmurings of discontented lords. Yet Varys never mentioned the Queen's rumored affair, nor did he hint that he believed it. Perhaps the spider knew more than he let on, or perhaps he was playing the game from both sides. Meanwhile, Cersei paraded herself as the dutiful wife, speaking often of the child she carried and the hopes for a future prince. She took counsel with Pycelle, had seamstresses adjust her gowns, and occasionally visited the sept to pray for a healthy birth. Jaime performed his Kingsguard duties with flamboyant ease, sparring in the yard with any knight who dared face him, all the while smirking at the court's adoration. At night, Ned believed, Jaime still visited Cersei's chambers. Whether Robert attempted to catch them in the act, Ned did not know. The king had taken to frequent hunts and longer nights of drinking, returning to his bed well after midnight. In the weeks that followed, Ned's frustration mounted. He was hand of the king, yet powerless to act on the greatest threat he saw. Robert had effectively tied his hands, ordering him to keep silent. The realm's coffers were draining fast, with the Lannisters providing loans to cover the king's expenses. This gave them even more leverage. In quiet moments with Catelyn, Ned expressed his fears. If Robert continues this way, he'll be beholden to the Lannisters for all the gold he needs. And when the child is born, recognized as his heir, their hold on the throne will be cemented. Catelyn clasped his hand. Could you not gather proof somehow? Present it to the council? Ned shook his head. Robert would deny it. The Lannisters would brand me a traitor. War would erupt. Even if some lords believed me, others would side with the Lannisters. The cost in lives would be staggering. Catelyn's face reflected his despair. So we do nothing? Ned sighed. We wait. Perhaps circumstances will shift. Or the child will have unmistakable features of a Lannister. Golden hair, green eyes. Maybe then Robert will be forced to see. But that will be months away. Even then, if Robert chooses to cling to the lie, we are at an impasse. Soon, Catelyn received word from Riverrun that her father, Hoster Tully, was gravely ill. She decided she must go to him. Though leaving Ned in King's Landing worried her, familial duty called. She embraced him tightly before she left, tears in her eyes. Keep yourself safe, Ned. Watch your back. The Lannisters are not to be trusted. Ned promised he would be careful, though he could not shake the feeling of being isolated without Catelyn's steadfast presence. Sansa stayed with him, as did Arya, but they were young and needed protecting. The weeks dragged on. Each day, Ned rose early, went about his duties as hand, and returned late to see his daughters. He watched the queen's belly grow rounder, her confidence seemingly unshakable. Robert seemed to sink further into drunken apathy. Jaime continued to exude arrogance, as though he walked untouchable through the halls. And though Ned tried to keep an eye out, no obvious cracks appeared in their facade. One night, however, an urgent message arrived from Varys. A small scrap of parchment with the spider's flowery script read, "Meet me in the dungeons at once. Speak to no one." Ned's pulse quickened. He wondered what trap this might be, but if there was any chance Varys had uncovered something, he had to see. He armed himself lightly and made his way through the winding staircases to the underbelly of the Red Keep. The flickering torches cast ominous shadows on damp walls. Rats scurried away at his approach. Varys awaited him in a narrow corridor, wearing that half-smile that never reached his eyes. "My Lord Hand, thank you for coming so swiftly." Ned took a breath, his voice echoing slightly. "What is it, Varys?" The spider glanced around nervously. "I have heard whispers that certain parties intend to move against the king. A plan is in motion, though incomplete. It involves a hunting excursion, wine, and an unfortunate accident that might befall the king." Ned felt a cold spike of alarm. "An accident during a hunt? Do you have names?" Varys pursed his lips. "Whispers point to those within the king's immediate circle. We can guess who might stand to gain from his demise. If the king were to die before the child is born, the child would be crowned posthumously as his heir, with the queen as regent. You see how convenient that would be." Ned's blood ran cold. "Cersei, Jaime, they would kill Robert. Does that truly surprise you?" Varys's voice was soft. "I have no proof to present, only hints. But if the king is so unwise as to accompany certain boisterous lords on this rumored boar hunt, with plenty of strong wine flowing, an accident might be arranged. Ned's hand clenched on the hilt of his sword. I must warn Robert at once. Varys raised a staying hand. Careful, my lord. If you warn him, he might dismiss it as paranoia. He has not listened to you regarding the queen before. He might well decide you are stirring trouble. Ned exhaled shakily. What would you have me do? Let him ride to his death. Varys shook his head. I suggest you accompany him, watch carefully. Do not let him out of your sight. Make sure no opportunities present themselves for a fatal mishap. If you can prevent the king from being harmed, do so subtly. And do not name your suspicions to him, for I fear he would not believe you anyway. Ned nodded. As distasteful as it was, Varys had a point. When is the hunt? 2 days hence, Varys said. It was only just decided in private. You will see the announcement soon. Be ready, Lord Stark. With that, Varys slipped away into the darkness, leaving Ned's heart pounding. So, the Lannisters might move to remove Robert entirely, installing the unborn child as a puppet king. Ned forced himself to calm. He would not let that happen. He might not be able to confront them directly, but he could protect Robert. The realm's stability depended on it. Sure enough, the next morning, Robert casually mentioned his plan for a boar hunt in the Kingswood. Several lords expressed enthusiasm, including some Lannister men. Jaime was conspicuously absent from the conversation, but Ned suspected that meant nothing. Jaime might have no need to attend personally if others were in place. Ned offered to join the hunt, ignoring Robert's protests that the Hand had more pressing duties in the city. He insisted that a bit of time away from the capital would do them both good, and Robert, in a rare moment of camaraderie, agreed. The day of the hunt dawned bright and clear. The hunting party set out on horseback, accompanied by hounds, beaters, and a wagon of provisions that included barrels of wine. Robert was in high spirits, laughing and joking as they rode. Ned kept himself near the king's side, watchful. He noticed that 2 of the lords riding with them wore Lannister colors. Lord Brax and Lord Crakehall, both men known to be loyal to Tywin. They seemed jovial enough, but Ned did not miss the speculative glances they cast at Robert's wineskin. Throughout the day, Robert drank more than he should, but Ned subtly intervened, urging the king to remain sober enough to have a proper chance at the boar. Robert grumbled, but occasionally relented, switching to water for short intervals. That evening, they made camp in a small clearing. Robert's mood turned maudlin as the wine took hold. He spoke of Lyanna again, how she had been stolen from him, how he had never loved another as he loved her. Ned patiently listened, though his heart ached. Around midnight, as some men slept and others tended the fire, Ned heard a rustle in the nearby brush. The hounds perked up. Tension crackled through the party. Could it be a boar? Robert, half drunk, insisted on going after it. Ned cursed under his breath and insisted on going too. In the confusion, the men scrambled to arm themselves. Robert staggered forward with a spear, ignoring all advice to wait until morning. Ned quickly donned a cloak and followed. In the darkness of the Kingswood, guided by moonlight and a few torches, they heard the boar's low grunt. Robert advanced, brash and loud, calling for the beast to show itself. Suddenly, the underbrush exploded. The boar charged, a monstrous creature with wicked tusks. Robert lunged, but his spear thrust was off, slowed by drink. The boar slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Ned surged forward, sword in hand, as the king let out a roar of pain. Another huntsman tried to intervene but was thrown aside. Ned slashed at the boar's flank, distracting it enough for Robert to regain his feet. With a mighty bellow, the king rammed his spear home, piercing the boar's heart. The beast squealed and collapsed. Robert stood, trembling, blood staining his cloak. Ned realized with horror that the boar had gashed open the king's side. Robert stared down, swaying, confusion on his face as he touched the wound. Blood seeped through his fingers. For a terrifying moment, Ned feared it was mortal. He jumped forward, supporting Robert. 7 hells? Robert gasped, coughing. I should have listened. They brought him back to camp, where the maester who had accompanied them set to work. Ned could see the gash was deep, but perhaps not instantly fatal. The maester cleaned it, stitched it, and gave Robert milk of the poppy to ease the pain. The king passed out, pale as a sheet. The men around him looked frightened. Lord Brax exchanged a glance with Lord Crakehall, then quickly looked away when Ned noticed. Ned suspected foul play. Perhaps the boar was driven their way deliberately, perhaps a bit too soon, or spooked at a crucial moment. It might have been a chance for Robert's drunkenness to become lethal, but Ned had been there to intervene. Robert still lived. They abandoned the rest of the hunt and returned to King's Landing at once. Robert was carried in a litter, pale and feverish. Cersei rushed to his side when they arrived, tears in her eyes, playing the role of the worried wife. Jaime hovered behind her, expression grim. Ned remained close, ensuring the maesters did all they could for Robert. Days passed as the king lay abed in pain, drifting in and out of fevered sleep. The wound refused to heal properly, and infection threatened. Some whispered it was a mortal blow. Others said Robert had the strength to overcome it. During that time, Ned noticed how the court whispered. Some said the boar had been enormous, a freak of nature. Others blamed the king's intoxication. A few looked suspiciously at the Lannister men in the hunting party. Ned refused to speak accusations aloud, but in his heart, he believed they had attempted to orchestrate an accident, or at least let it happen. The only reason Robert still lived was that Ned had remained vigilant enough to keep him from being too drunk, and had intervened swiftly. But Robert hovered on the brink. If he died, the unborn child in Cersei's womb would inherit the throne as a Baratheon, but truly a Lannister. That could not be allowed. Yet Ned could not simply declare the child illegitimate without Robert's backing. And Robert was too weak to rule, too delirious to make decisions. As the king's hand, Ned now faced the gravest dilemma of his life. If Robert succumbed to the infection, Cersei would crown her unborn child, and the realm would be locked into a Lannister stranglehold. Tywin would likely become regent, or Cersei would. Jaime might exert tremendous influence. The truth about the child's parentage could be forever silenced by any means they deemed necessary. Ned and his family would be in mortal peril. Ned realized that he must prepare for the possibility of Robert's death. He had to gather allies, ensure that the regency did not fall solely into Lannister hands. Possibly Stannis Baratheon, Robert's elder younger brother, could be the rightful heir if Cersei's child was proven illegitimate. But Stannis was in Dragonstone, a stern man not loved by many. However, Ned believed in the rightful line of succession. If none of Robert's true children existed, then Stannis was next in line. All these thoughts swirled in Ned's mind as he stood watch outside Robert's chambers. Inside, he heard the ragged breathing of his friend. Cersei was within, presumably tending to him. Jaime was often near, which set Ned on edge. Each hour that passed, the realm teetered on a knife's edge, awaiting the king's fate. The memory of Ned's earlier vow, to keep silent about the child's parentage, weighed heavily on him. If Robert died now, that vow would doom the kingdom. And so Ned stood, a quiet sentinel in the corridors of the Red Keep, heart heavy with the knowledge he bore. He clung to a single hope, that Robert would rally, recover enough to learn of the plot that nearly claimed his life, and find the courage at last to confront the truth about Cersei and Jaime. Until then, Ned Stark would wait, watch, and prepare himself for the storm that was sure to come. He only prayed the storm would not sweep them all away.